November 20th, 1945. Inside the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, Germany, a courtroom is called to order. Sitting in the dock are 21 surviving officials of the Nazi regime. These are the men who directed armies, administered death camps, and managed the systematic murder of millions. The prosecutors have a mountain of meticulously documented evidence. What they don't have is a law. If the Allies simply execute these men, it becomes an act of military vengeance. To ensure the history books record this as a legitimate trial, they need a formal legal proceeding. But the specific atrocities committed by the German state had no clear definition, no established jurisdiction, and no existing court with the authority to hear them. Any legitimate legal system relies on a bedrock protection, nolum crimen sine lege. You cannot be punished for an act that wasn't legally defined as a crime at the exact moment you committed it. The defense attorneys immediately seize on this. Their clients operated under the full authority of the German government. In many cases, their atrocities were entirely legal under the sovereign laws of their own nation. International law offered no alternative. While the Hague Conventions covered some rules of combat, there was no statute anywhere prohibiting a government from exterminating its own civilian population or defining aggressive war as an individual criminal act. The legal teams arriving in the summer of 1945 have roughly 5 months. They must engineer a completely new architecture for international law from scratch, all while convincing the world they aren't simply breaking the basic rule of precedent. The chief American prosecutor, Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, formulates the answer. He argues the acts of the Nazi leadership violate basic human morality. Even if unwritten, these principles are inherently recognized by all civilized nations, and the lack of formal codification exists only because no one ever imagined crimes on this scale. Jackson and the Allied teams draft the London Charter, creating 3 defined categories. First, crimes against peace, aggressive war, and war crimes, extending military customs. The third is crimes against humanity, engineered to cover the systematic persecution of civilians and the Holocaust. By defining evidentiary standards for crimes against humanity, the prosecution creates a mechanism to hold individuals accountable for mass extermination within an actionable legal system. With the charges defined, the defendants attempt to shield themselves. Their primary tactic is arguing that they were simply following superior orders. The tribunal explicitly rejects this. They establish that following orders does not absolve you of individual criminal responsibility when those orders demand a clear atrocity. Next, they try to claim state sovereignty. Senior officials argue that a nation's leaders cannot be judged by outside authorities for official state actions. The prosecutors shatter this defense as well, arguing that sovereign immunity does not protect individuals who weaponize the state to commit international crimes. By challenging these defenses, the tribunal established a new international standard. Government officials can no longer rely on the machinery of the state to hide from personal criminal liability. To prove these crimes, the prosecution weaponizes the Nazi regime's own obsessive documentation. Meticulously filed supply orders, Wannsee conference minutes, and transport schedules make it impossible to claim ignorance. The logistics of extermination were managed like a public works project. 11 months later, the judges deliver their verdicts. 3 defendants are actually acquitted. This is crucial. It proves the defense had a real opportunity to challenge evidence, distinguishing Nuremberg from a predetermined show trial. The trial leaves behind a modern investigative blueprint. The most reliable proof of an institutional crime is almost always the institution's own administrative record. The legal concepts articulated in that courtroom, known as the Nuremberg Principles, are quickly adopted by the UN and form the bedrock of modern international criminal law. Yet the trial carries a persistent moral flaw. It is widely criticized as an exercise in victor's justice. The Allied powers sitting in judgment had themselves committed devastating acts during the war. Massive civilian bombing campaigns, the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe, and the use of atomic weapons on Japanese cities all went entirely unprosecuted. The newly minted legal framework establishes profound accountability, but its very first application is inherently hypocritical. Robert Jackson acknowledged this tension in his own private papers. He recognized that for the Nuremberg Principles to hold lasting legitimacy, they must eventually be applied to everyone, including the victors. Today, international criminal courts routinely prosecute leaders of smaller nations, while global superpowers consistently refuse to subject their military and diplomatic actions to the same jurisdiction. The lawyers at Nuremberg spent 5 months designing a system for international justice that still governs the world today. The enduring test is whether that system will ever be applied to the powerful as consistently as it is to the defeated.